We'd like to thank our sponsor, Purina Pro Plan, Fuel for Life. More sporting dog champions feed Pro Plan than any other brand of dog food.
Are you a football guy?
I am. Yeah. Well, I watched the game
college
last night
or NFL?
anyway. What's that?
College or NFL?
Both. Yeah. I went to the University of Georgia for a couple of years, and that was back when like Herschel Walker and all were there. So it was a good football time. And so I like college, but I also watch NFL too. So
yeah. Did you watch that game last night?
I did.
What a wild game.
It was actually a good game. I won $20 off my buddy. He gave me 6 points. So, I had to explain to my wife how I won the bet and the Cowboys lost the game. So she doesn't get it, but.
Jeff, did you watch that game last night?
No, we had practice and homework. I looked at my app and there was a delay.
Yeah, there's like an hour rain delay.
Oh, yeah. Really?
Yeah. And then they came back and nobody scored after that. Well, nobody
all I
scored
saw
in the second
was
half.
Delay and ejection for spitting. That's it. And that was all
which was a whole thing. It was crazy.
That was after the first series?
The spitting happened before the game even started.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, after the kickoff before the first snap.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it was wild. But yeah, college football last weekend. Jeff's a Oklahoma fan. I haven't even talked to you about Texas losing.
Oh man, it was a good day.
You lost it. Yeah.
And Bama lost. It was like,
yeah. I'm a closet Longhorn fan, so
oh really?
We don't have to talk about that. But
yeah, that's a rough day for you then.
Yeah, and I like Texas and anybody that's playing against Ohio State. So I like lost twice. You know, those are my two favorite teams. Yeah.
Are you a Broncos fan or a Cowboys fan? I know you said you bet on the Cowboys.
So I lived in Texas for quite a while, so I kind of became a Cowboys and Longhorns fan, and most of my friends hate me for that, but
yeah, rough fan base to come from.
Yeah. But now it's easy to start to like the Broncos, so I'm kind of rooting for the Broncos now.
They've got a
I was
good
never
team
a big
going.
Sean Payton fan, but I like Bo Nix. So.
Yeah, they've got potential.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. Well, I'd like to jump back into our normal Save for the Blind podcast. This is Carson Odegaard with my normal co-host, Jeff Smith. And today's guest is Karl Gunzer, who is the director of Sporting Dog Group at Nestle Purina Pet Care. So, Karl, welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk all things dogs as well as dog food and a little bit of everything in between. So, again, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So, Karl, kind of want to dive in on your background and your personal story. So kind of share with us your background a little bit in the retriever space, and then we'll talk about how you ended up in the role you're in today.
Yeah, sure. So probably the most important thing was, I started off as a duck hunter and then kind of got infatuated with dogs. And, I was competing as an amateur and training and eventually got offered a job working for a pro actually out in California. So, I moved to California, trained retrievers out there for a few years and then kind of just started my own business in Texas, moved to Montana and kind of bounced around a little bit. But eventually, I spent 20 some years as a field trial professional, field trialing retrievers, based out of Montana. And I'd go to Texas or Southern California in the winter and, did field trials for like 20 some years and then got offered a job with Purina. So I've been here now, I guess about 13 years in this role with Purina.
Karl, was that a dream of yours to be a professional trainer, or is that something you just kind of walked into as a hobby?
It's funny. That's a great question. And I think probably most pros never knew they wanted to be that, I was living in Montana. I worked for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and, I was competing as an amateur, with dogs and, I really loved it. That was my kind of hobby passion, kind of like hunting is now, it's like, what do you want to do when you're not working? And whenever I was not working, I was dog training. And, I flew out to California for a week, to go train with a guy in Marysville, Jim Dobbs. He ran the Tritronics training center at that time. And, I took a week's vacation, went out there, trained with him, and at the end of that week, he offered me a job to come back and work for him. So I went back to Montana and quit my job and packed everything in the back of a pickup truck and moved to Sacramento Valley and moved to California. So, kind of an odd, I don't know, you know, that's sort of life, right? Like you never know what's going to happen next, but that was really what started. And it was just the passion for dogs and dog training and hunting that sort of took me there.
And what did that job entail? You mentioned something about, you know, doing studies or something like that?
Yeah. We were working for, I was hired by Tritronics actually. So Jim worked for Tritronics and that was the electronic collar manufacturer. And they had this research and training center where we would sort of test everything. Like we would train dogs, but we would also like utilize all the equipment in real world times. Like in the mornings, you know, before you'd go training, you'd take like battery readings and all that stuff and then go train all day. And at the end of the day, you know, take battery readings and then charge them overnight. And it was kind of like, just really doing research on electronic collars to help develop, you know, better, you know, like if you remember the old collars they were real big and they'd have a big antenna that you'd pull up and, you know, the transmitters kept getting shorter antennas and the receivers kept getting smaller until like what we have today, which is, you know, a fraction of the size and twice the range and all that. But it was kind of fun to kind of play with electronics and train dogs all day is what we did. At that time, we didn't train for the public. We wrote some books and manuals and we did demos kind of across the country. So we'd fly to, you know, different states and just do dog training demos, try to teach people how to use the collar. But then I competed with dogs out there as well. So it was it was a fun experience till, Tritronics decided they didn't need the research and training center anymore. And then, then we were unemployed, but, no, it was a lot of fun.
How long were you doing that out here?
I think that was about 3 years. Oddly, like I was hired by Tritronics and within 6 months of moving there, they decided to close the training center. So literally I moved to California and 6 months later didn't have a job. But thankfully, Jim Dobbs, who had hired me and, all that kept me on and we started what was then called Dobbs Training Center. And we started selling electronic equipment and then, you know, doing books and seminars and manuals and training dogs for people. So we kind of like sort of got kicked into the real world instead of working for Tritronics. We started, you know, just our own training business.
And as a duck hunter, were you excited to come to California or is it kind of an unknown of what the waterfowl hunting is?
It was a huge unknown, Jeff. It was really crazy because I left Montana and we had really good duck hunting in Montana.
Where in Montana?
So I lived near Missoula and Stevensville. But we would mostly duck hunt like east of the mountains. And so kind of Gore to Choteau and near Great Falls and that area. And I don't know if it's the same. I mean, this has been 30 years ago, but at that time you could basically drive around, find where birds are feeding, go knock on a door and almost always get permission. Like it was truly, not that hard. Now it was hard to get permission to hunt pheasants for whatever reason. Like, you know, they'd be like, yeah, you can go shoot those. I don't know why you'd want to shoot those ducks or geese, but don't shoot my pheasants, you know? So we'd kind of just buzz around. But, so I kind of was worried going to California that the duck hunting wouldn't be good. I actually found out it's really good. Although a lot of it was private, as you guys know. So, but as you know, there was great public hunting opportunities out there, as I'm sure all your listeners know from Gray Lodge and other areas around the Sutter Buttes. There were lots of places that you could actually hunt. Yeah, and I was fortunate to end up with a few clients that had duck clubs and got invited on a few of the duck clubs. But, I don't think a lot of the world knows the quality or the duck history of California. Like I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay and then hunted, you know, kind of like field ducks and different things. But I was really shocked about what a great waterfowl culture that California actually has.
Yeah, we were talking to Terry Denman from Mojo the other week, and he kind of said the same thing. Like, he's been out here a lot, and he came out here early on, and a lot of California hunters were trying new things that nobody's ever seen before, and the amount of ducks they could put the items in front of, like, nobody really knew until they came out here, and it's like, oh, we got like a whole culture of hunters out that really nobody knows about.
Yeah, for sure. And even though, so I knew that there was I'd hunted rice fields in Texas and all that, but I didn't realize, before I moved there, I didn't realize how much rice California produced, of course. And, you always think of Arkansas, and I think of, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas as, the rice areas, but heck, I'm sure California probably produces as much rice or more than those areas. I don't know that, but,
yeah.
I'm just guessing, but there's a pile of rice in California.
So you went from basically Tritronics to then working for Dobbs directly. And then did you eventually split off and create your own training company?
Yep, exactly. Yep. That's what I moved to Texas and started my own business, kind of doing young dogs and training like derby and qualifying and like hunt test level dogs, and then moved back to Montana, kind of where I had left when I moved to California, and I started, training there, like open all age field trial dogs, running nationals at a higher level, and then was there for, I guess, probably 15 years. I would be in Montana like half the year. So probably, April till October, November, and then we'd go south depending. Sometimes I'd go to, Florida for a couple months if I had a place to train there, or to Texas, or, we'd gone to Southern California for a while, down around Brawley, Calipatria area near the Salton Sea, which is another, we'd see people down there duck hunting around the Salton Sea too. So it was kind of cool. That's a different environment to duck hunt altogether again.
It's just a different environment, period. To be down there. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So how does somebody who's been, training dogs all of a sudden, I guess Purina dog food, but how do you make that connection? And then how did it fold into a job?
Yeah, right. Well, I fed a lot of ProPlan, right? So I was feeding Purina, and I had tried a few different, foods throughout the time, and really nothing compared in my mind to ProPlan. So that's what I kept feeding. And, I got to know, so Purina, and that's sort of how I ended up in the role I'm in. Purina sponsors, thousands of sporting dog events a year, probably, like the National Retriever Championship, National Bird Dog Championship, all those events. And so Purina sends somebody to those events and kind of to be a representative of the company. And so I got to know those people at the events, and, started doing some work sort of as a, I guess this was before there was really the influencers were even a thing, but I started, kind of representing Purina at some events. There wasn't really even social media at that time, but they would, basically say, hey, you want to be a sponsored influential and, attend some events for us and promote our brands, and, we'll do this for you. And so I kind of got to know, the team at Purina, and really they were just great people. And so I had been working for them for a few years, kind of like a part-time, we called it a consultant deal. So I would, represent them at events. And basically my business got so busy that, I really didn't have time to do events for Purina anymore. So I told Bob West, who was, in my position at that time, I told Bob, I was like, I'm sorry, but my dog training business is too important for me to start, have a little side gig. I'm just too busy. I said, I love the company. I love you guys, but I can't really do anything part-time. I said, if you ever have a full-time job again someday, reach out to me, but I can't do it part-time. And literally like 10 years later, like Bob calls and he's like, hey, we got a full-time job now. Are you interested? I'm like, well, I don't know. I guess. So, I really wasn't again, just like I wasn't looking for a job training dogs with Jim Dobbs. I wasn't really looking to quit dog training either, but, Bob just kind of talked me into it. It was a chance to, in some ways, give back to the sport I love. Like I knew, how much Purina did for dog sports. I knew that after, 20 years of self-employment, it would be really cool to have things like health insurance and maybe retirement and that kind of stuff. So that was attractive. So I don't know. There are a lot of things that just led to a shift and a new decision. But, again, it was just like kind of an unexpected thing that now, 13 or 14 years later, here I am doing this job. So,
and why do, more sporting dogs champions feed Pro Plan than any other brand? And can you speak to the effect of what's in the actual dog food, and what makes your brand much better than others or competitors?
Yeah. Well, and it'd probably be a little unfair to say like a blanket statement that it is better than others, but I know what we do, and I don't know what everyone else does, but I know, Purina has been around. First off, like the company's been around since I think 1894. So it's like, the company has been in the livestock or feed business for 100 and some years. Basically Purina made the first, pet foods with dog chow, a dog chow started in 1926. So we're next year will be 100 years of that brand. And you try and think of how many brands have been around for 100 years. I mean, it's literally the oldest dog food brand. But Purina is always there's 500 researchers and scientists that work at Purina that are constantly trying to develop, new, better pet foods. And I think, they discovered, Purina is the first company to use real meat as a first ingredient. So Pro Plan uses real meat as a first ingredient. It's higher in protein and fat. So it's really effective for sporting dogs for energy. So dogs, the higher fats, dogs use fat as their first, is their best fuel. So, you got carbs, protein, and fat, and dogs utilize fat for energy as sort of their best source of energy. So Pro Plan started one of the first higher fat diets. I think, in 1987, Pro Plan started with, a 30% fat, where most, I think a dog chow fat is probably 15% fat. It's much lower. 20%. It's 30% protein, 20% fat. And dog chow would be 15% fat or 13%. So Pro Plan was a higher fat, higher protein. And what was found is that it really helps performance dogs, have more energy, more stamina, higher oxygen metabolism. So for an athlete, the longer you can run, the higher your oxygen metabolism, the longer you can run, the more energy, the more endurance that you have. And so Pro Plan developed these formulas, really with endurance athletes in mind. So, I think at that point you saw all of the people that competed with dogs moving to these higher protein and higher fat diets as, I don't want to say an advantage, but all of these dogs are really trained to a high level, and they're really, they're great genetics. There's really good training, but you need to have, kind of the third leg of the stool is nutrition. So everyone started moving to really making sure that you're feeding a high quality nutrition, because you start doing these big, field trial tests, or if you're campaigning bird dogs where these dogs are running for miles, having more energy equals a better performance. You don't get winded as fast, you have more endurance. And so there became sort of this big shift towards feeding higher quality foods where, 20, 30 years ago, I think, the joke was people that would feed whatever prevents death, right? As long as your dogs are doing okay, they didn't realize that nutrition was actually something that could impact performance. So I think as Pro Plan and Purina were sort of the leaders in this movement, I think is what really helped a lot of people, start utilizing Pro Plan, for their competition dogs. And that's really why, we see that more people that are competing are feeding Pro Plan than any other brand. And we, that's not just a marketing deal. I mean, we know that that's true. We keep track of all of the national championships, the biggest events, and truly, if you go to the Retriever National Championship, more than 90% of the starting dogs feed ProPlan. I mean, it's pretty amazing. If you go to the Master National, I mean, it's not going to be quite that high, but it's still going to be 60 to 70% of the dogs competing are eating ProPlan. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So you're talking about, obviously, the dogs that you're around and you're training are higher level athletes, we'll call them, and they're eating the ProPlan. Is ProPlan also okay for average Joe Schmo duck hunter from California, or should they be feeding their dog something else?
Good question. So there are different formulas in the brand. So ProPlan is still going to be like, the highest quality ingredients, the highest quality processing, higher protein and fat. So more of the protein is going to come from animal proteins than, vegetable-based proteins. Like people always think that protein, they only think of meat. I mean, there's protein in corn and peas and everything else, but ProPlan is going to have a higher percentage of protein coming from a meat source than, say, a dog chow or something. So, it really is a great formula for all dogs that will benefit from it, but they don't have to eat the 30-20, high performance, higher protein and fat. They're fine with, like, we have an adult maintenance. We have different levels of the sport. Like there's a sport 30-20. There's a sport 26-16, which is probably about, 15 to 20% fewer calories per serving. So there's a broad variety of formulas. There's growth formulas. So for like a puppy, you want a puppy formula. We've got weight management formulas for dogs that are overweight. And then, of course, the senior dogs, we've got senior formulas for those. So I think that's an important piece of the brand is there's a wide variety of formulas to fit the unique needs of any dog.
And when people are looking at dog foods, I mean, maybe some people are just more of a price point. They go in and see the cheapest dog food there is, and then the next month they might switch to another brand. Yep. How important is it to keep a dog on, the same thing, month after month after month or year after year?
It's funny. People often think of their own diets and think, my God, I would not want to eat the same food every day of my life, right? Can you please give me something else? I don't know. Like, I literally fed dogs for like 13 years on like the same formula. And now maybe they can't complain, but they never seem to complain. They ate it and they looked great and did well. So, I don't think variety from a dog's perspective is something that's a real thing. I mean, I think they're happy to eat, and they, I always say about people, you've got some people that eat to live and other people that live to eat, right? Like I'm not a foodie. I don't really of course I like a good meal. Who doesn't? But I mean, that's not something that means anything to me. I eat just so that I can live, so that I can go hunting or horseback riding or dog training or whatever, I want to do. And, I think, there's other people that their meal is like, hey, let's go to, I don't know, Sacramento and have, a fancy dinner at some cool restaurant. Like, I don't believe dogs feel that way. I think they just, eat to live. So I don't think variety really matters. I think, a high quality food with good ingredients, that's manufactured properly. One thing we don't talk a lot about or hear about is all of the micronutrients and ingredients like, DHA and EPA, which is like fish oils, omega-3s and 6s, which contribute to, healthy skin and coat and, healthy joints and, that kind of stuff, which, the higher quality dog foods are going to have more glucosamine and chondroitin and fish oil and EPA and DHA and all these different ingredients that are helpful for the dog's life. And so, I think there is a value in a higher quality dog food. And then you don't need to supplement. A lot of people like to supplement. And there's good reasons to supplement, older dogs that are getting arthritic, maybe additional, joint care or things like that, or different skin, depending on the dog. There's certainly a case for some supplements, but really a good, complete and balanced dog food is really the first step in good health.
And I'm seeing, it's been around obviously for a while, but it just seems like there's an uptick in dog food where it's like, salmon or buffalo or name what other kind of like off,
Have your
meat
dog eat what
source.
you're eating.
Yeah.
Whole egg and
kangaroo or whatever. Yeah, right? Yeah. No. Jeff, I think a lot of that's probably marketing. There is a case for some novel proteins for dogs that might have different allergies, like protein allergies, ingredient allergies, like going to a different protein source can be a thing. But honestly, the number of dogs that have an allergy to like, chicken or beef or lamb or whatever is way lower than most people think. And likewise with grains. I mean, that's kind of, you hear that as a big deal. Like, is it a grain-free food? The dogs are actually more likely to have an allergy to a protein like chicken than they are to corn or wheat or soy. But a lot of like the human marketing mind of like, hey, I'm gluten-free or, low carb, blah, blah, blah. That kind of spills over into the dog food marketing, and companies use that as product differentiation. So they'll say, hey, backing up, Purina really believes in the science, and ProPlan follows the science. And there's no science that shows that grain-free foods are better than foods with grain. In fact, there's recent research and information that actually maybe points to the opposite, that it is good to have some grains in food. So we don't make ProPlan, we don't make a grain-free ProPlan. We make some with different ingredients, and some have ingredients that others don't have or whatever, but that's really not a basis for our science. We follow the science, and the science says that grains are good for dogs. And, for the people that say, well, wolves didn't eat, grain, dogs have adapted over thousands of years. And I hate to tell people that, your peekapoo or whatever is not a wolf, right? I mean, they're so far from a wolf now that, they're still the same, sort of species maybe, but they have adapted, and dogs now are able to digest grains and carbohydrates much better than a wolf. So, there is reasons to have those ingredients. But so, like I said, I think a lot of that, different protein sources is marketing, but there are some cases where there is value in a different protein source.
Like, is there a positive or a negative, from dry food versus wet food?
The biggest, wet foods are more palatable, so they taste better. But they're also like 60% water, and they're more expensive, and they tend not to be as nutrient dense. So for like a hardworking dog, it's hard for a wet food to give them the calories and nutrition that they need. And it's also quite expensive. Mm-hmm. So, I think most working dogs are doing better on like a more nutrient dense kibble. And then if people like, to treat the dog, or if the dog is super picky, they can blend in a little bit of wet food. But I think that's better as more of a topper or an additional thing. And one good thing about the wet food is it does help promote hydration. I mean, I think that's maybe one of the things people need to be cautious with when they're feeding a dry food, is make sure that dogs have, plenty of water. We usually recommend in working dogs or sporting dogs is floating the food. So adding some water to the dry kibble when they eat. Depends a little bit on the dog. Like in some cases it works. In other cases, dogs don't like it, or they may gulp differently. But in general, I think it's a good idea to float food, especially in a sporting dog. Like if you're working or traveling, just to add additional hydration. That's one of the nice things about wet food, is they're getting, moisture while they're eating with the wet food.
Our next hunt program deadline is September 20th. So this includes all of our opening day waterfowl hunts scattered throughout California. We also have some upcoming events. We have a pocket recruitment on September 10th. We have 2 events on September 11th, the Blackhawk Banquet and the Marin County Banquet. We also have bingo in Bishop on September 18th. You can find all this information at calwaterfowl.org. Don't forget, September 20th, opening day waterfowl hunts. calwaterfowl.org.
That's interesting. I have a black lab, and I don't think he would care if his food was dry, wet, on fire, frozen. It doesn't seem to matter. I was just thinking in my head, how often in your training days did you get a lab that was picky enough where you'd have to switch up wet food?
Carson, in a kennel environment, like, I don't want to say never, but I mean, they figure it out. And, you know, that's one of the things I always try and tell people, like with puppies and all that, is it's really helpful to train your dog to eat. And it sounds weird, like dogs are born wanting to eat. Obviously they are, but they're also, they can be creatures of habit or lazy, and they can get picky. And really, like with puppies and all that, I think one of the great strategies is to put food down, give them 5 minutes. And if they don't eat it in 5 minutes, pick it up. And then, you know, their next feeding, you know, you need to feed the appropriate amounts. But, like in a kennel environment where you've got a bunch of dogs eating and there's so much excitement around mealtime, even a dog that doesn't eat, like you'd put that food down the first day and they might take a couple bites and play around with it and then leave it. I would pick it up. And, you know, after a couple days, they figured out pretty quick, like, hey, you know what? I need to eat dinner here. Otherwise there is no dinner. And so for the like 1 out of 100 labs that came into the kennel not having an appetite, by the time he left, he figured out the deal. Like, okay, eat when it's presented, you know?
That's so interesting you say that, because like I said, my lab eats food no matter what. My wife's mini golden doodle kind of is on that same mentality, I think, because she grew up with the lab eating. And then both times that we've watched my in-laws' dogs, who are grazers, one's a standard poodle and one's a little cattle dog, and they are kind of same thing, have had their food out forever, graze. Both times they've been here, they've eaten their food like as soon as it comes down. And then we tell my mother-in-law, and she's like, that never happens at our house. And then same thing with my sister. She dropped off her Boston Terrier last week, grazer, dog house, all the food right as it went down. It was like that pack mentality just must be going through them, that, oh, everybody's eating, everybody's excited, I better eat. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I don't eat, maybe he'll eat mine.
Yeah. It was super interesting.
There's the biggest reason people are like, what's wrong with grazing? And maybe probably nothing. The thing is that, like, if you've got a dog that you feed and it eats its food and all that, if that dog's feeling sick and you put that food down and it doesn't eat, that's like an immediate cue. You're like, oh, how come he's not eating? Like,
my dog didn't eat, something would be wrong.
Yeah, you're like immediately going, he's sick. Where a grazer, you may not notice that for a couple of days. And then, you know, also, like, if you're going to work a dog, if it's a grazer, like, what if that dog, you know, decides he's going to eat his meal right before you go hunting. And now you got a dog that you take hunting and he's got a full stomach. And now he's got to try and run on a full stomach, which is not good for the dog or, you know, digestion or any of that stuff. He's inevitably going to get diarrhea and start colitis and all those things. So it's like, there's lots of really good reasons as a, you know, either a trainer or a hunter to portion food. And then you can really watch their weight too and control their weight. It's a lot harder if they're a grazer to kind of control their weight. You know,
you had mentioned feeding times. What do you recommend for, we'll tag on the hunting side of it, hunters and their hunting dogs?
So I'll start with a theory of the kind of what I was mentioning. You don't want a dog to run with food in their stomach. Digestion takes blood flow, and that blood flow, if a dog is hunting and running, he needs that blood flow in his muscles and his legs and, you know, his brain and everything else. And it's going to cause diarrhea and stomach issues and colitis if you run a dog with food in the stomach. So based on that, my recommendation is once a day in the evening. So the dog has, you know, basically 12 hours for that food to get out of the stomach, to get fully digested. It can take up to 24 hours for food to get through a dog's system. So it's at least 12, and it depends, some foods digest quicker than others. Depends a little on the dog and how it's fed, but, it's going to take at least a couple hours for food to get out of the stomach. So, I mean, it's going to depend how much, but like a full meal could take a couple hours. So if you feed a dog at, 7 in the morning and then go run it at 8 or 9, it's still going to have food in its stomach. And even what's not in its stomach is already in the small intestine, and that needs blood flow for digestion. So my recommendation is once a day in the evening. Now, if a dog either, maybe has hypoglycemia or is a hard keeper where it needs, a greater amount of food to keep weight on, then, you can feed a couple times a day. But the important thing is to give it enough time after that morning meal for that food to be digested at a minimum out of the stomach, hopefully move through digestive tract more. I'd say at least 2 hours, 3 or 4 would be better. But, I just think, if you think about it, people say, well, what's my dog going to like? What's going to keep him going all day if I don't feed him in the morning? Well, what you feed him in the morning is in his stomach. It's in his intestines. That's not metabolized food ready to be fuel. The fuel is already in his muscles and is been absorbed in glycogen and all those things. And that's what's going to be used. So, I mean, if we took a page from like the sled dog guys, they typically would feed, 18 to 24 hours before their first day of racing. So you're not feeding them, 12 hours before they race. You're feeding them 18 to 24 hours before they start running. And you're not feeding them again until after they start running. Now, if it's a multi-day race, obviously you can't wait, that long in between meals. You're going to have to feed them as they get breaks and as they take rests and all that. But really, that food in the digestive system is not energy. It's just packing along extra weight and heat. So,
is there any strategies of like, peak hunting season or peak trial season where you're adjusting food, amounts, or is it basically just keep to the same program every day, same time, same amount?
Yeah, no, for sure. I would say with the field trial dogs that are constantly in training, there's not a lot of change. Like their portion is kind of their portion, and there may be small ups and downs, but if they're always working, they kind of get fit and they have a metabolism that they need. For the one thing is in cold weather, it takes a lot more calories for dogs to maintain heat, especially if they live outside. Let's say they're a kennel dog and they're outside.
What's considered cold since we're in California?
It's a sliding scale. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Below 80? No, I'm kidding. It depends. I've been up in Redding and Red Bluff in the wintertime, and it can get dang cold there too.
Oh yeah.
Cold and wet. But, so there's research that shows, I'm trying to get this right. It's either, I think for every 10-degree drop in temperature, a dog needs 7% more calories, for warmth. Now, so if likewise, if it's 30 degrees and it gets, 20 degrees warmer, they could need like 14% fewer calories. So let's just think of it as it changes from what's normal. If it's just a regular dog, it's burning those calories to stay warm. So, while I can't give an exact percentage more or what is cold, all I can say is if it was 80 degrees and now it's 40 degrees, your dog probably needs, 7 times, 20, let's say 20% more calories to live in 40 degrees than it does in 80 degrees. So in the wintertime, you're going to be increasing calories, to keep the same weight if your exercise stays the same. And same way, as it moves to summertime, if you don't decrease the amount you're feeding, your dog's going to start putting on weight just because it doesn't need to burn calories to produce heat to stay warm. So I think, for hunting season, definitely, it depends too. Like I always say hunting season, and then I think about 20 years ago, I got to go hunting 3 times a year. Well, I didn't need my dog in peak condition for the 3 hunts where I maybe shot 2 ducks, right? Like that really wasn't anything different. But, like the bird dog guys, if you are a diehard, upland hunter and, you go, take a 2-week trip to Montana in October, by the end of that 2-week trip, your dog is going to be skinny, and one of the problems is as you travel and you go to new places, that's when dogs do tend to like maybe not eat as good because they're not home or they're in a crate or a truck or, they get stressed because they're running or, just things are different. And then maybe they go off their food a little bit. Next thing you know, they're getting skinny. So, I think, the amounts that are on dog food bags, the recommended feeding analysis, that is a great place to start. But I've seen dogs that need twice or 3 times our recommended daily feeding, depending on how hard they're working and that dog's metabolism. Likewise, there's dogs that need less, and so, it's sort of a balance. And there is a body condition score chart that you can look at. I think, I don't know, if you go to Purina.com, you can find it there, but you could just Google BCS, body condition score, chart for dogs, and it'll show people like, you should be able to see a few ribs on a thin-skinned dog, or on a thick-haired dog like your Chesapeake, you should be able to feel a few ribs, So, it's, you want them kind of like, our runners. You don't see any, overweight marathon runners. You really shouldn't see overweight canine athletes either. It's just harder on their bodies, on their joints, on their, muscles, bones, everything. They're more injury prone. So, a lean dog is usually a healthy dog. And if you look at like the real athletes, like the bird dogs and the sled dogs, those dogs, they are ripped and they have no fat on them,
So I want to kind of go back a little bit when we were talking about all the different formulas and plans that Purina comes out with. How does somebody go about choosing the right one for their dog? They're like, oh, my dog is this, but where does it fall into the category? Is there like a survey they can take on the website that'll kind of steer them the right direction? Or is it just a mix and match game of guessing?
Yeah. That's a great question. And, I wouldn't even have thought of that, but you mentioned it. And we do have I think it's called like My Plan. You can go on to like proplan.com and select My Plan and put in information. So what that little computer does is it looks at, the body condition score. Like, is it light? Is your dog heavy or light? It'll look at the breed. It'll look at an activity level. It'll look at life stage. So is it how old is the dog? And that changes a little bit for the breed. Like, bigger dogs are growing longer than little dogs. And so it takes all that into account and then sort of spits out a list of potential, good choices for your dog. And then there's lots of different ones that would fit in that category. It's not going to come down and say, oh, you need to feed, ProPlan Complete Essentials salmon, 2.5 cups a day, but it will give you like a list of foods that are, recommended. And then it becomes a little bit of a trial and error. I usually recommend people start with a little smaller bag, like instead of buying a, 50-pound bag of, ProPlan Sport chicken, buy a 6 or an 18-pound bag and make sure the dog likes it, make sure, they do good on it and eat it well. And then you can kind of play around. Some formulas have, different textures or shreds in them. Others are just straight kibble. So there's a wide variety. But yeah, that's a great way to do it, is just use that little formula finder and My Plan.
We kind of touched it earlier, but could you talk about the difference between, hunt test and field trials? And did you prepare dogs differently from those types of tests?
Yeah, that's a great point. So they're different, but they're the same. I think the biggest thing to explain to people is that a field trial is competitive, one dog against another. So if you have, 80 dogs in a open at the end of 3 days or 2 days, depending how fast it goes, you're going to have one winner and a second place, third place, etc. There's 4 places. And in order to become a field champion, you have to have a win. Yeah. So you have to have one in all age open and then have so many points, like 2 seconds or a second and 2/3, whatever. Hunt tests are similar, but they're not competitive one dog against another. They're competitive against a standard. And so you might have 80 dogs in a master test and, 20 or let's say 40 of them pass and the other 40 do not pass. And so to get a title in the hunt test, you have to have, so many passes. So like, depending on what level, like you'd have to have 5 master passes to become a master hunter. If they were senior hunter. So there's different, they're different games. The field trial game, because it's competitive one dog against another, it gets more extreme. The tests get longer, tougher, more challenging. And it just gets a lot harder because the judges have to separate those dogs and they have to pick a winner at the end of the event. So, it's not uncommon to see field trial marks that are 300 and 400 yards and blinds that are 300 and 400 yards. You could have a swim with a 20-minute test. It could, have several, 100-yard swims, where the hunt tests, are designed not to be as challenging because it's against the standard. And you don't want the standard to be so hard that, very few dogs pass it. So, they restrict distances and put some limitations. I think, 100 yards is about as long as you typically see a hunt test mark. You'll see some longer, and the rules have changed a few times, and I don't run them anymore. So I'm not hip whether it's, if it can't be more than 150 or 125, but there's a few limitations, and there's actually different formats. So you've got, AKC, HRC, Super Retriever Series. There's different formats. I would say that hunt tests do simulate hunting more than a field trial. In a field trial, you've got a gunner that's in a white coat so that the dogs can see, the gun throw the bird. At a hunt test, all the guns are hidden. They blow duck calls at hunt tests. And, in 20 some years of field trialing, I never saw a duck call blown. Not to say it couldn't happen, but, in hunt tests, oftentimes the handlers, depending on the format, they either have to, hold and fire a gun. It'd be a pop or a blank, but they either have to hold and fire or guns are shot in the field. So, hunt tests are a lot more like hunting than field trials. That said, field trial dogs can make great hunting dogs because, they have a higher capacity for difficulty. They run farther, straighter. They have to be a little, mark a little better to be competitive. So, hunt test dogs can be field trial dogs and field trial dogs can be hunt test dogs. It's just like I said, it's a different format. I've known lots of dogs that were successful at both. I would say it's probably easier to train a dog to be a field trial dog and then do hunt tests than it is to take a 5-year-old hunt test dog and then start doing field trials. It's sort of like, it's the difference between me trying to learn Spanish now as trying to learn it when I was, 5. I probably would have learned it a lot easier at 5 and it would have stuck. Now it, it's just not as easy. Just like people, the older the dog gets, their learning curve slows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But both formats are great. And I really highly encourage hunters to, it's a great off-season game. It's fun for the dog. It's a great community of people. There's a lot of it in California, probably more, maybe not as much as there used to be, but, there was a bunch of good hunt test, clubs, in California. So,
and they aren't breed specific, right? Like there could be a golden retriever going up against a lab, against a Chesapeake, against
exactly.
Whatever.
Yep. Depending on the, whether it's a HRC or AKC, like I'm probably more familiar with AKC because that's what I ran. But, there's a variety of breeds. And, you just mentioned that I think you can run poodles in some events and Nova Scotia duck tolling retrievers, but they're, flat-coated retrievers. They're all retrieving breeds. But, if you get to the field trials, it's really going to be like 99. It's going to be about, 80% labs, probably 15% Goldens and 5%, Chesapeakes or, I don't know. There's actually a few more Chesapeakes out on the West Coast. Some of the better Chesapeake breeders and stuff, historically were from, Oregon and the West. So there's some great Chessies out there, but, yeah, any retrieving breed can compete, but they compete against each other, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've seen an uptick in folks, at least through the hunt program, getting what I guess I'd call multi-use dogs, Griffons and such, that where these newer onset hunters are wanting to experience, pheasant hunts as well as duck hunts, and they don't know what they like. So they get kind of a multi-tool dog. So it's cool to see these dogs become more prominent.
It really is. We're actually, on Monday, the NAVDA Invitational starts in Iowa. And, so that's the 8th, I think, of September. And it's really cool to see what, the competitive dogs do. And that's testing sort of versatile dogs against versatile dogs. So there you're not asking a short hair to, run a 400-yard blind like a retriever. But likewise, we're not asking a retriever to point birds. So the NAVDA Invitationals are a really neat event where versatile dogs, they have to do watermarks, which are doubles. They have to do a big, blind, like a water blind. They do a duck search where they have to search. And then of course they have to point and, retrieve to hand and all that. So, they have to be steady. So it's really fun. And I think for a lot of hunters, they don't need the, precision of like a field trial retriever, right? They need a dog that can find their ducks, and a lot of the versatile breeds have excellent noses. They're really good at searching. They've been selected and trained to track. So they tend to be really good at finding a lost or wounded bird that, you shot, swam to the tules and then, ran off in the tules, and they gotta trail it. So, it's, I'm seeing more and more versatile dogs duck hunting than I think ever before. And it's great because there's so much they can do with them. And like you said, they're a lot of fun to pheasant hunt and chucker, grouse, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're running towards the end of our podcast, but I wanted to touch on Purina's new sponsorship. You guys are sponsoring the podcast this month, and I know you had worked at a nonprofit, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. So why does somebody like Purina jump on as a sponsorship for somebody like CWA nonprofit out in California, not nationwide, but why is that something that's important to you guys?
Yeah. Really two things. The first is probably the most important in my mind is it's about the dogs, right? People utilize dogs in sporting events, in hunting and all that. And Purina's goal is to make the best dog food for dogs, and especially, these hardworking, active dogs. And, the company's, kind of saying is people and pets are better together. There's lots of research and things that have shown the importance of, the human animal bond and how people live longer, healthier lives when they have a dog or have a companion animal. So, I'd say there's days that dogs stress you out, obviously, but in general, they help people live longer, better lives by having a pet. So a lot of it's for the dog and the nutrition of the dog. And then the other part of it, and it's part of why we are, partners with, CWA and DU and Pheasants Forever and other nonprofits, is that, it's the importance of, our environment, clean air, healthy soils, clean water. As a large manufacturer, we have a corporate responsibility to be good stewards of our resources and our ingredients. And you can't grow, good ingredients without, clean water and healthy soils and all those things. So as part of, Nestle's initiatives, we spend money to reduce our, emissions, our carbon footprint. We do more with recycling. And then of course, we spend money to promote, a healthy environment. So, I think we do a lot of that in areas that grow, ingredients that we utilize, and rice is a big ingredient that we utilize. And so, with like organizations like CWA and DU that, work with rice growers and rice producers and see the benefit for waterfowl of rice, I think it's a really, it's a natural partnership. So, I think there's a lot of reasons, but those are a few of them.
Yeah, well, I know we appreciate it as a company, and me and Jeff appreciate you hopping on with us today for an episode of Safe for the Blind. Appreciate all the knowledge and the sponsorship that Purina has given us for this month. So again, Karl, wanted to thank you, and hopefully you have a great weekend.
Thanks. It's been great chatting with you guys, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Appreciate it, Karl.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Save It for the Blind podcast. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.